Now, after multiple delays, the evidence against David, spelled d4vd, is finally about to come out. In just a little over a week, prosecutors are expected to begin presenting the evidence they claim connects him to the death of Celeste Rivas, giving us our clearest look yet at what they actually have against him. But that is not the only development. A separate investigation has actually now been opened inside the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's office, after more than a dozen employees were reportedly questioned over whether they accessed restricted files connected to Celeste's case without proper authorization, and whether that could explain how confidential details reached the public. So I want to share these updates with you guys, explain why David's hearing kept getting delayed, and talk about this investigation inside the medical examiner's office, because I definitely think this is a conversation worth having. Now, like we all know, David, spelled d4vd, real name David Burke, is currently facing multiple charges connected to the death of Celeste Rivas. We don't need to go over every single detail, because I'm sure most of you guys already know about the very disturbing allegations that David is facing. But what I do want to discuss is why the hearing that was supposed to reveal the evidence against him kept getting pushed back, and what these alleged leaks from the medical examiner's office could mean moving forward. So following David's arrest, his attorneys initially pushed for the evidence against him to be presented as quickly as possible. In fact, his preliminary hearing was originally scheduled to begin on May 1st, 2 weeks after his arrest. This was supposed to be the first time prosecutors publicly laid out the evidence they believe connects David to Celeste's death, and a judge would determine whether there was enough evidence to send him to trial. However, that hearing never happened. It was initially moved from May 1st until May 26th as both sides continued preparing for the preliminary hearing and dealing with the enormous amount of material involved in the case. Then in the middle of May, the hearing was pushed back for a second time, this time from May 26th until June 29, after David's defense requested more time. And this came shortly after prosecutors revealed just how much material was involved in the case. So according to David's attorney, they were still waiting to receive certain evidence from prosecutors, including requested DNA material. At the same time, the prosecution revealed how much evidence they were actually working with in this case. Most of us have already heard about it, but the total amount of discovery in the case was reportedly going to exceed 40 terabytes. So both sides were essentially dealing with a massive and continuously growing collection of phone data, iCloud material, forensic evidence, search warrant records, and witness testimony. But then June 17 came around, just 12 days before the hearing was supposed to begin, and it was delayed for a third time. That morning, David appeared in court for a status conference, which is basically a pre-trial meeting between the judge, the attorneys, and everyone else involved in the case. During that hearing, David's defense team asked Judge Charlene Olmedo for even more time, and once again, their request was granted. The defense reportedly submitted a sealed declaration explaining why they needed the hearing pushed back, meaning the public still doesn't know exactly what the reason that they gave was, but after reviewing the declaration privately, the judge ruled that there was good cause to delay the hearing again, and a new date of July 21st was selected. So the hearing went from May 1st to May 26th, then June 29, before finally being moved to July 21st. That is a lot of delays. But obviously whatever David's legal team presented inside that sealed declaration was good enough, or at least reasonable enough, I should say, for the judge to agree that they actually did need more time. And considering the sheer amount of evidence prosecutors claim to have against them, I guess that makes sense, right? Now, interestingly enough, David returned to court on July 7, and David was described as appearing unshaven, while the courtroom sketches showed him with noticeably longer hair. There was also a courtroom sketch released. Now, of course, a sketch probably doesn't perfectly capture what he looked like in person, but I can only imagine how much stress he has to be under right now, because regardless of what his defense ultimately argues, he's now sitting in jail facing some extremely serious allegations, while prosecutors prepare to publicly lay out the evidence they claim to have against him. At that point, there really is no escaping the reality of the situation. But the other thing I want to discuss is the extremely serious investigation now unfolding inside the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's office over who may have accessed and potentially leaked restricted information connected to Celeste's death. Now, some of you guys might remember that after Celeste's remains were discovered, the LAPD asked the medical examiner's office to withhold information surrounding her death. The medical examiner initially, rejected that informal request because it did not believe there was enough legal authority to impose that hold. So the LAPD was like, yo, don't release this information. And then the medical examiner's office was kind of like fighting back against that. But in November 2025, the LAPD obtained a court order that officially locked down the file and prevented information like the cause of death, the manner of death, and the medical examiner's report from being released. So behind the scenes, there was already some level of tension over whether the information should remain or should be released to the public or withheld from the public in order to protect the investigation. And now, all this time later, it turns out that the employees inside that same office are reportedly being questioned over whether some of that restricted information was accessed without authorization and potentially leaked anyway. And the obvious question is, why would somebody leak it? Well, one second, I'm about to show you something, okay? So if you're looking at the screen, I got a little something right here. Money, allegedly. Because when information is this sensitive and the entire world is desperate to know what happened, that information can suddenly become extremely valuable. Now, to be clear, nobody has publicly proven that any employees were paid to leak anything, but here's what reportedly raised the question in the first place. So for anyone who remembers or anyone who doesn't, while Celeste's medical records were still sealed, media reports started coming out containing extremely specific details about her condition and how she may have died. And that immediately raised a serious question. If the records were restricted, how were people outside the investigation apparently learning these details? Ding, ding, ding. Because in an office like this, you cannot just open any case file you feel like looking at. Access is very controlled. And when somebody enters a restricted database, that activity will leave a digital trail. People obviously have different levels of authorization and clearance. And these systems that have all this very sensitive information, they of course maintain access logs. So in this case, they did a little bit of investigation and they found out a couple of things. So in this case, the investigators may be able to go back and determine who accessed Celeste records, when they accessed them, and whether they had any legitimate reasons to be looking at them in the first place. Because if somebody inside that office opened Celeste files just to satisfy their own curiosity, or even worse, pass that information to somebody outside the investigation like a media platform who's going to give you some money, that is a massive breach of trust. And honestly, that is a crime too, right? So these employees, they potentially had access to all this information that the public, the media, and everyone else following this case was very desperate to know. But access is not permission. You cannot just open a restricted file because you're curious, and you definitely can't take that information and pass it along. Every person who enters a file like this is supposed to have a legitimate reason for doing so. And that activity leaves like we said again, like a digital trail. And from there, they're obviously going to compare those records that were accessed with the timing of specific details appearing in media reports. If they prove that somebody improperly accessed or shared this information, that person is going to face serious discipline and potentially lose their job. Honestly, I think they should face some prison time, because that's not okay? And honestly, it's a shame because this should never happen. We're talking about the possibility that somebody accessed private information connected to the death of a child and passed it along, potentially out of curiosity, for attention, for some money, personal benefit, whatever. All the investigators have not publicly established any motive. And if somebody really did access and leak a dead child's information for their own benefit, that's morally disgusting. I mean, this young girl was murdered and her family was already dealing with the worst thing imaginable. And then here comes somebody snooping, trying to leak this private information. I think it's absolutely disgusting that this is even a thing. And I really hope whoever did this, they get held accountable, because somebody willing to abuse that kind of access cannot be trusted with sensitive information, especially information involving dead children and grieving families. Now, overall, when it comes to this case, if another delay doesn't happen, we're about to get our clearest public look at the prosecution's evidence. So it's currently July 12, Sunday. So it's around 9 days until all this goes down. And you already know time is going to pass like nothing, because that's just how time moves these days, right? I'm going to stay on top of everything and keep you guys informed. You already know how we do, right? If you made it this far, drop a like on this video. My name is Blacky Speaks. Nice to meet you. Like the video and subscribe if you're new here. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm out.